The organ stopped at 2:14 p.m. I know the exact time because I had been staring at the clock above the choir balcony for 7 minutes, doing the only thing a trauma nurse does when a room starts bleeding out. I counted, I measured, I watched faces. I tried to diagnose the disaster before it became fatal. Claire was supposed to walk through the cathedral doors at 2:07. She didn't. 400 people were staring at me in a white tuxedo I suddenly hated. The stained glass threw pieces of red and blue light across the marble floor, making the whole thing look almost holy, which felt obscene. My hand was wrapped around 24 white roses, because Claire once said 24 was our number. 24 hours in a day, and every one of them, Ethan, I want with you. I had laughed when she said it. I was still holding the roses when the thorns broke skin. My best man, Marcus Reed, trauma surgeon, and the only man I knew who could stay calm during a mass casualty alert, touched my shoulder once. I didn't turn around. I was watching the front pew. Victoria Whitmore, Claire's mother, sat with one leg crossed, silver dress glittering, red wine, balanced between two fingers. She hadn't called her daughter once. That was when I knew. I need to explain how a 33-year-old trauma nurse practitioner with a graduate degree, a mortgage, and what I used to call functional pattern recognition ended up standing alone at an altar while a woman in silver watched me bleed into my own hand. The short answer is that love makes smart people stupid. The longer answer starts 18 months earlier, the night Claire Whitmore walked into Mercy General's ER with a shallow cut across her forearm and a smile that made every fluorescent light in the room seem less cruel. She was beautiful in a way that looked effortless, dark hair pinned back badly, mascara smudged from crying, a silk blouse with blood on the sleeve. She apologized for wasting my time before I even touched the wound. I stitched her arm. She asked questions about my job, like she actually wanted to know the answers. She remembered the name of a patient I'd mentioned 2 weeks later. She sent coffee to the unit after my first 20-hour shift. She made me feel chosen, which is a dangerous thing when you've spent most of your life being useful instead of wanted. My mother died when I was 9. My father raised me in a 2-bedroom outside Pittsburgh and taught me that love meant showing up tired and doing what needed to be done anyway. So when Claire flinched every time her mother called, when she stepped into hallways and lowered her voice, when she came back smiling too carefully and said, "She just worries," I believed her. I gave Claire every doubt I had. The first time I met Victoria Whitmore, she hosted dinner at her Beacon Hill townhouse, the kind of place that didn't look decorated so much as curated by generations of people who had never checked a bank balance before buying anything. The dining room table seated 16. There were only 8 of us, which made the empty chairs feel intentional. The china looked thin enough to see through, and expensive enough to make me afraid to lift it. Everyone there spoke the same language: museum boards, private schools, summer houses, charitable foundations with family names carved into stone. Victoria seated me at the far end of the table. Claire noticed. She squeezed my knee under the table, then did nothing. Victoria wore pearls and a smile so polished it could cut glass. She didn't insult me directly. That would have been vulgar. And Victoria Whitmore was never vulgar, unless she had an audience large enough to make it useful. So, "Ethan," she said, tilting her head, "a nurse practitioner. Is that different from a nurse?" "It is," I said. "More training, more clinical responsibility." "How progressive," she said, "men in caregiving roles. I imagine hospitals are very encouraging about that now." Someone at the table smiled into his wine. She asked where I went to school, how much debt that required, whether my family was medical people, and whether trauma work left room for ambition. Each question sounded polite. Each one landed like a gloved hand, pressing on a bruise. After dinner, Marcus called me while I was walking to my car. "How was the dragon?" he asked. "She's not a dragon," I said. Worse, I looked back at the townhouse. Victoria stood in the window, still smiling. "Worse," I said, "run." I laughed because I thought he was being dramatic. I stayed because Claire kissed me that night and told me her mother just needed time. I believe that, too. Claire proposed 8 months later. That always surprises people when I say it. They expect the man to kneel, the woman to cry, the script to behave itself. But Claire had always liked breaking rules when it made her look brave. She took me to a rooftop restaurant in the rain, laughed because the candles kept dying, and slid a ring across the table with her hands shaking. "Marry me, Ethan," she said. I said yes before the waiter finished pretending not to stare. For the first month, being engaged felt like standing in sunlight after a long shift underground. Claire was softer, happier. She talked about vows in bed and sent me photos of venues during my breaks. Then Victoria stepped in, and the wedding stopped belonging to us. 3 months before the ceremony, she replaced our florist with hers because white roses from a hospital-adjacent vendor apparently lacked refinement. She changed the menu after telling the caterer that trauma nurses had simple palates. She had a private conversation with the venue coordinator that moved my coworkers from Mercy General to the last 3 tables near the kitchen. When I confronted Claire, she rubbed both hands over her face. She means well. She moved Marcus behind a pillar. She has strong opinions. So do I. Ethan, please. Her voice sharpened, then softened too fast. I can't fight her on everything. I heard the word can't and told myself it was won't. I told myself they were different. 6 weeks before the wedding, Claire started working late. She was climbing fast at Cross Meridian Group, and Evelyn Cross had a reputation for demanding impossible hours from people who wanted impossible futures. I understood long shifts. I understood exhaustion. What I didn't understand was why Claire started taking her phone into the bathroom. 2 weeks before the wedding, I came home early from a night shift and heard her in the kitchen. "Mother, I told you. It's handled," she whispered. "He doesn't know anything. Yes, I know about Sebastian. I know what this could mean." I stopped in the hallway with my hand still on my work bag. Sebastian. I didn't know anyone named Sebastian. Claire went quiet for a moment, then said, "After the wedding, we can fix the optics. Just trust me." I stepped back before she saw me. Then I did what people do when they are terrified of the truth. I renamed it work stress, family pressure, a misunderstanding, anything but betrayal, and I finished planning my wedding. Victoria Whitmore stood at 2:21 p.m. She rose from the front pew with the calm, practiced grace of a woman, arriving exactly on cue. Someone handed her a microphone. I still don't know who. That detail has bothered me more than it should, because it means this wasn't spontaneous. Props had been prepared, timing had been considered. She walked to the altar with her wine glass in one hand, and that silver dress catching every shard of colored light. "There will be no wedding today," she said. 400 people inhaled at once. My fingers tightened around the roses. A thorn went deeper into my palm, and I held on to the pain because it was honest. It was measurable. It made more sense than the room. "My daughter is across town," Victoria continued, her voice rich and steady. "With Sebastian Vale, a man from a real family, a man with a future, a name, and the kind of life Claire was raised to want." She turned to me. "You were useful, Ethan, safe, dependable, but you were never the groom. You were the rehearsal." The room went so quiet I could hear the wine shift in her glass. I have watched people receive impossible news in trauma bays. I know the look that comes over a face when the mind refuses the information, but the body understands it first. I felt that look settle over me. Victoria reached for my boutonniere, white rose, silver pin. Claire had fastened it herself that morning, with shaking hands I'd mistaken for emotion. Victoria ripped it from my lapel, hard enough to tear the fabric. "Honestly," she said, looking at my white tuxedo, "this was always too much." Then she lifted the glass and poured red wine down my chest. The cold hit first, then the smell. Dark, sweet, expensive. It spread across the white fabric like blood under gauze. Someone near the back laughed. Someone else lifted a phone. My knees didn't buckle dramatically. They just stopped believing in me. I went down one hand first, catching myself on the marble. Roses crushed beneath my palm. Victoria leaned close enough for only the first rose to hear clearly. "Go back to changing bedpans, nurse." That was when the footsteps started, slow, deliberate, unhurried, click, 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 and the laughter died. The footsteps came from the center aisle, not running, not hesitant, not the frantic shuffle of someone trying to help because guilt had finally caught up with them. These were controlled steps, heel to marble, each one landing with the kind of certainty that made people move before they understood why. Click, click, click. I kept one hand on the floor. The other was still wrapped around the destroyed roses. Wine dripped from my jacket onto the marble between my knees, dark red against white stone. I remember thinking, stupidly, that it looked like a trauma bay after the first rush of blood had already been wiped away. Then the room changed. I had felt that shift before, in emergency rooms, in disaster drills, in the first 30 seconds after a senior surgeon walks into chaos, and the noise rearranges itself around authority. People stopped whispering, phones lowered. Even Victoria went still. Evelyn Cross stopped beside me. I had only seen her once before, across a ballroom at a cross-meridian charity event, surrounded by board members and politicians who leaned toward her like plants turning toward light. She was taller than I remembered, dressed in black. No jewelry except a thin watch, and a pair of diamond studs so small they looked less like decoration than punctuation. Claire's CEO. The woman magazines called merciless, brilliant, untouchable. She looked at Victoria first, not long, just enough. Then she crouched beside me on the wine-soaked marble. One knee touching the floor, without the slightest concern for the suit she was wearing. Her face was calm, but not soft, focused, precise. The way I look at a patient who is deciding whether to stay conscious. "Ethan," she said. I looked at her because my body obeyed authority before my mind caught up. Her eyes moved once over my torn lapel, the wine, the blood in my palm, the crushed roses. She saw all of it. She did not pity me. That mattered more than I can explain. "Breathe in," she said quietly. I did. Again, I did. Then she leaned closer, her voice low enough that it felt like the rest of the cathedral had fallen away. "Don't break," Evelyn Cross said. "Not when you're about to win." I didn't know what she meant, but I believed she did. She stood, offered me her hand, and I took it. Evelyn pulled me to my feet slowly, giving my legs time to remember their job. I stood beside her in a ruined white tuxedo, with wine dripping from my sleeve, my palm bleeding around crushed rose stems, and 400 people waiting to see whether I would fall again. Evelyn faced them. She didn't ask for Victoria's microphone. She didn't need it. 3 years ago, she said, I was in a car accident on I-95. The silence that followed had weight. It pressed against my ribs. My driver was unconscious. The car was on fire. I was trapped, bleeding badly, and awake long enough to watch several vehicles slow down, record the scene, and keep driving. A murmur moved through the church, then died. One person stopped. Her voice did not rise. It sharpened. He broke the passenger window with his elbow. He cut his own arm getting me out. He used his scrub top to pack the wound in my side, and kept pressure with both hands until the paramedics arrived. He kept telling me to stay with him, that I wasn't allowed to leave before help came. My stomach turned, because I remembered. June 2nd, rain, the smell of gasoline. My second pair of scrubs already ruined from a double shift at Mercy General. I remembered seeing smoke on the shoulder and pulling over before I consciously decided to. I remembered the woman in the back seat, pale and furious and losing blood fast. I remembered breaking the glass on the third hit. I remembered dragging her across asphalt while 3 cars passed us. I remembered leaving when the paramedics took over because I had to be back at the hospital in 4 hours. I had never told anyone, not Marcus, not Claire, no one. To me, it had been a Wednesday. Evelyn turned her head and looked at me. I have been looking for him for 3 years, she said, and today. Mrs. Whitmore, you poured wine on the man who saved my life, because you thought his work made him beneath your daughter. Victoria's face went white. For the first time all afternoon, she had no smile ready. As for Sebastian Vale, Evelyn said, and the temperature in the cathedral seemed to drop. He is not an heir. He is not old money. His name is Adrian Locke, and he is an actor I hired 11 weeks ago. Victoria's hand jerked around the microphone. The feedback screamed once through the speakers before she lowered it. What she said, the word came out stripped of polish. Evelyn looked at her the way people look at a document before signing something final. My senior director was engaged to the man who saved my life, she said. I discovered that 14 weeks ago during a routine internal review that became much more interesting than expected. Senior director, that was Claire. I wanted to know what kind of woman Claire Whitmore was before she became family to a man I owed my life to. So I built a test. No one moved. I introduced a fake heir, a fake family office, a fabricated philanthropic merger, and a social circle designed to look exactly like the world Claire and her mother had spent years trying to enter. Adrian played his role beautifully. He was charming, rich, connected, and completely imaginary. Victoria stared at Evelyn like hatred could still save her. It took Claire 22 hours. Evelyn continued. My chest went tight. She told Adrian that her engagement was a temporary complication. She said Ethan was stable, loyal, and convenient, but not the kind of man who belonged beside her once the Vale opportunity became real. She said the wedding could proceed for optics if necessary, but the marriage would be handled quietly afterward. I heard someone gasp behind me. I didn't turn. Evelyn's voice became even colder. She also said, and I quote, "He's a nurse. He knows how to take care of people. That doesn't mean he knows when he's being used." The roses in my hand broke further. I felt a thorn slide deeper into my palm and welcomed it because it gave me one clean pane to focus on. Evelyn glanced toward the empty aisle where Claire should have appeared. I have recordings, I have messages, I have evidence of coordination between Claire and Victoria Whitmore regarding today's ceremony. My attorneys filed the relevant materials this morning as part of a workplace conduct and ethics review. She paused. Claire Whitmore's employment at Cross Meridian Group was terminated at 9:00 a.m. today. The murmur rolled through the cathedral like weather. Evelyn turned back to Victoria. You arranged for Ethan to stand here, dressed for a marriage your daughter had already abandoned, so he could be humiliated in front of witnesses. You used vendors, contracts, guests, and a church as props in a cruelty you mistook for strategy. Victoria sat down hard. Evelyn's final words landed softly. My legal team will be in contact. The cathedral doors burst open before anyone had recovered enough to speak. Claire came down the aisle at a run. Not the walk we had rehearsed, not the slow, graceful entrance she had practiced twice in the empty church while Marcus made faces behind the altar. She was running, one hand gripping the front of a half-zipped ivory dress, hair falling loose from its pins, makeup blurred around her eyes. For one stupid second, my body reacted before my mind could stop it. There she is. Then she reached the altar, saw the wine on my tuxedo, the torn lapel, the blood in my palm, the crushed roses on the marble, and Evelyn standing beside me. Her face changed. Not grief, not horror, calculation. Miss Cross, Claire said, breathless. That was the moment I stopped loving her. Not slowly, not poetically. Something inside me closed with the clean finality of a door locking. She had not said my name first. She had not asked if I was hurt. She had not looked at the mother who had just dismantled me in front of 400 people. She looked at her CEO and tried to understand how much she had lost. Ethan, she said quickly, turning toward me now. Listen to me, please. This got out of control. I stared at her. I looked for guilt, for grief, for one flash of concern that belonged to me instead of her own consequences. There was nothing. My mother pressured me, she said. You know how she is. Sebastian was just, I was confused. I panicked. I love you. Her hand reached for my arm. I let her touch my sleeve for half a second, because I wanted to remember exactly how little it moved me. Then I stepped back. The ring on my finger felt suddenly ridiculous, a symbol from a ceremony that had been dead before the organ ever started. I pulled it off and dropped it onto the marble beside the roses. The sound was small. Claire flinched anyway. I turned to Evelyn. She was watching me, still and unreadable, not pushing, not rescuing, not asking me to become anything for her. Just there. I grabbed the lapels of her black jacket and kissed her. It was not strategy. It was not love yet. It was fury, release, oxygen after being held underwater too long. Behind me, Claire made a broken sound. I didn't turn around. When I pulled back, the cathedral was silent in a way I had never heard silence before. Not awkward silence, not shocked silence, something heavier. 400 people holding their breath because the story they thought they were watching had just torn itself in half and become something else. Evelyn looked at me for one long second. Then she turned to Father Gregory Chen, who had been standing at the altar with the expression of a man watching theology, contract law, and human disaster collide in real time. Father, Evelyn said, calm as a boardroom vote if Ethan is willing. I'd like to finish the ceremony. Father Chen blinked. Claire made a strangled sound behind us. That is not legally possible without the proper license, he said gently. I know, Evelyn said, ceremonially. Then she looked back at me. Marry me instead. It should have sounded insane. Maybe it was insane. But standing there, in a ruined white tuxedo, with red wine drying cold against my skin, and the woman I had planned to marry, staring at her career in pieces, instead of my face. Insanity felt cleaner than humiliation. I looked at Father Chen. I do, I said. Security moved before Claire did. 2 men I had not noticed near the back doors stepped into the aisle with quiet precision. Claire shouted my name once. Victoria shouted something sharper. Neither of them reached me. The ceremony took 11 minutes. It was not legally binding. Father Chen explained that later in the vestry over tea, using the careful voice people use around blast survivors. There were forms, waiting periods, licenses. But in that room, in that moment, it mattered. Because I did not leave as the man Claire abandoned. I walked back down the aisle beside Evelyn Cross, and everyone watched. The groom's room was too clean. White walls, white leather chairs, a mirror framed by soft bulbs, a silver tray of untouched champagne sweating under perfect little beads of condensation. It looked like a room designed for photographs, not for a man standing in a ruined tuxedo with wine drying against his chest and blood in the lines of his palm. I stood in front of the mirror and assessed myself the way I would assess a patient. Palm wounds, superficial punctures from rose thorns. Left elbow old scar reopened slightly from when I hit the marble. Tuxedo total loss, self intact, mostly. My hands were shaking. I hated that. I pressed them flat against the sink and watched my reflection do the same. There was a red stain down the front of me, a torn lapel, one missing boutonniere, and a face I recognized only because it had my eyes. Marcus came in first. He didn't ask if I was okay. That was why he was my best friend. He just closed the door, leaned back against it, and said, well, I let out something that was almost a laugh. Yeah, I said, Evelyn Cross. Yeah, you kissed Evelyn Cross in front of God, your ex-fiancée, and 400 witnesses. I noticed. Marcus looked at the stain on my tuxedo. For the record, strong pivot. I laughed for real that time, and it hurt somewhere under my ribs. A knock came at the door. Marcus opened it. Evelyn stood outside, holding a garment bag over one arm, composed and quiet, as if the last 3 hours had been difficult, but manageable. Behind her, I could hear music from the reception hall. Apparently, the band had started playing. Apparently, 200 people had stayed. I didn't want to presume, Evelyn said, but I thought you might want something that belonged to you. She handed me the garment bag. Inside was a midnight blue tuxedo, cut clean and sharp, with a black silk lapel and a deep red lining that flashed only when the jacket moved. It had weight, quality, intention. I looked up. This was made for me 12 weeks ago, she said, after I confirmed who you were. You expected this. I hoped I was wrong. Her voice softened, barely, but I wanted you to have a way to walk back into that room without wearing what they did to you. I held the suit for a long moment. Who are you? I asked. Evelyn's eyes stayed on mine, the woman who has been waiting 3 years to answer that question. The legal proceedings began the Monday after the wedding. Evelyn's attorneys moved with the kind of speed that made me understand very quickly why billion-dollar companies keep entire floors of lawyers on payroll. Victoria Whitmore was named in a civil complaint that alleged intentional infliction of emotional distress, civil fraud involving vendor and venue contracts, and coordinated misrepresentation of a wedding event she knew had been turned into a public humiliation. I had not expected that last part to matter legally. Naomi Park, my attorney, corrected me during our first meeting. Cruelty becomes very expensive, she said, when someone signs contracts to stage it. Victoria's lawyers tried to frame the entire thing as a private family misunderstanding that had unfortunately become public. That argument lasted until Evelyn's team produced the messages between Victoria and Claire, discussing timing, guest visibility, microphone access, and what Victoria called a clean social separation. A clean social separation. That was what she had named it. Claire's termination from Cross Meridian Group stood. She filed for wrongful dismissal in January, claiming entrapment, emotional coercion, and reputational damage. The filing was dismissed before spring. The recordings made it difficult for her to argue that she had been tricked into saying things she did not mean. She had spoken casually, clearly, repeatedly. By February, her apartment in Back Bay was gone. A former colleague told Marcus she had moved into Victoria's Connecticut house. Marcus told me, only because I asked him to stop protecting me from information I could survive. The recordings became Exhibit C in the civil case. I listened to them once in Naomi's conference room, sitting beside Marcus, who kept one hand on the back of my chair like he was ready to catch me if the floor disappeared again. Claire's voice filled the room. She called me loyal, useful, predictable. She said I was good for stability, but not for the life she wanted, once Sebastian opened the right doors. She laughed when Adrian, pretending to be Sebastian, asked whether I suspected anything. No, she said, Ethan takes care of people. That's what makes him easy. I thought hearing it would destroy me. It didn't. It hurt, but not like surprise, more like a wound finally being cleaned properly, after weeks of pretending it was healing on its own. The infection had a name now. The rot had a source. Victoria settled out of court for a figure Naomi described as deeply satisfying. I never asked the exact number twice. Claire lost her job, her case, most of her friends, and the stories she had planned to tell about me. For the first time, I did not feel responsible for helping her survive the consequences of her own choices. What I did not expect was the video. I should have. There were 400 people in that cathedral, and it was 2024, which meant at least one person was always going to choose documentation over decency. Someone near the back had recorded Victoria's entire performance. 9 minutes. It started with her saying there would be no wedding. It caught the moment. She called Sebastian Vale, a real man from a real family. It caught her ripping the boutonniere from my lapel. It caught the red wine spreading down my white tuxedo, while I stood there too stunned to move. It caught the laughter from the back rows. It caught me dropping to one hand on the marble. And then it caught Evelyn Cross walking down the aisle. By the time I changed into the midnight blue tuxedo, the video had already been posted on 3 platforms. By Monday morning, it had 11 million views. By Wednesday, outlets I actually recognized were running headlines about the abandoned groom, the fake heir, the billionaire CEO, and the mother of the bride who turned a wedding into a public execution. The comments were brutal, not toward me. That part surprised me. People defended the work. They defended the word nurse like Victoria had insulted someone in their own family. Men wrote about being mocked for caregiving jobs. Women wrote about mothers like Victoria. Nurses from every state seemed to appear overnight, furious and organized. The internet does not heal you, I know that. But there was something strange and clean about watching the same phones that had once made my humiliation permanent become the reason Victoria could not rewrite it. She wanted witnesses. She got them. She wanted me exposed. Instead, the world saw her clearly, and for once, I didn't have to explain what had happened to me. Everyone had already watched it. Evelyn and I married properly 14 months later, on a Tuesday morning in October, at a courthouse in Lower Manhattan. There were no chandeliers, no string quartet, no 400 guests whispering behind flower arrangements, no aisle long enough to become a crime scene. Just Marcus as my witness. Evelyn's CFO, Harold Marsh, as hers, and a clerk who mispronounced my middle name twice before Evelyn corrected him, with the calm precision of a woman who could bankrupt a country before lunch and still remember how I took my coffee. I wore a navy suit and flat black shoes, because I had worked a 12-hour shift the night before, and my feet had earned mercy. Evelyn wore cream, not white, and carried no flowers. Afterward, we went to a small restaurant that looked casual until the maitre d' saw Evelyn and nearly levitated. I ate pasta at some point. Evelyn said something dry about Harold treating Joy like a tax liability, and I laughed before I could stop myself. Her face changed. Not dramatically. Evelyn did very little dramatically, but something in her loosened, some careful internal brace finally unclenching. What I asked. Nothing. Evelyn. She looked at me across the table with the same steadiness she had given me on a wine-soaked marble floor. I've been waiting to hear that, she said. The laugh. I wasn't sure I'd gotten it right. Gotten what right today, she said. The courthouse, the restaurant, the quiet, you. That was the thing about Evelyn Cross. She had more money than entire hospital systems, more power than most people should be trusted with. And yet she never once tried to purchase a new version of me. I still work trauma at Mercy General. This surprises people. They ask why I don't quit, why I don't travel, why I don't let being married to Evelyn turn me into a man who lunches and smiles in photographs. I tell them the truth, because I am good at the work. Because bodies in crisis do not care what happened to you last year. Because when someone is bleeding, the world becomes simple in a way life almost never is. I still take doubles. I still come home at 3 in the morning with hospital soap dried into my hands and silence sitting heavy behind my eyes. Evelyn is usually awake, reading in the living room. She hands me tea without asking how it went, because she knows I will tell her if I can. She learned my silences, not to fill them, to respect them. Victoria Whitmore sent me a letter 6 months after the settlement. I did not open it. Naomi read it and said it was half apology, half legal strategy. I told her to file it wherever documents went to die. Claire, I heard, got engaged again to a man from Connecticut with family money and excellent teeth. The person telling me waited for a reaction. I considered what I felt. Nothing sharp, nothing open, nothing that still belonged to her. I hope he has good attorneys, I said. That was the last time I discussed Claire Whitmore, so if you're listening to this because someone made you feel temporary, useful, convenient, or small, understand this. Sometimes the worst public ending of your life is just the first honest witness to who everyone really was. And sometimes walking away is not the victory. Sometimes standing there, covered in what they did to you, and refusing to become it is.